The morning broke like a blade of light across the gray waters of the naval bay. The gulls had not yet begun their cries, and the sea still slept beneath a sheet of mist. The base, however, was already awake, a living engine of discipline and tension. Boots struck pavement in rhythm, orders were barked, and somewhere a ship's horn echoed against the cliffs like a reminder that peace was always temporary here. The flags climbed their poles in the pale dawn, the fabric whispering in the wind, and beneath them, the brass and steel of the Navy gathered in silence. Inside Command Hall B, the air was taut, thick with unease that didn't yet have a name. The projector flickered, casting blue light across the polished insignia on uniform shoulders. Admiral Kerrigan stood at the head of the long table, his presence cutting through the murmurs like a drawn saber. He had the kind of posture that didn't bend with age, rigid, severe, a silhouette carved from authority itself. His eyes, ice gray and unwavering, moved across a folder stamped with an emblem no one had seen in a decade. Asterisk Operation Silent Forge. Asterisk, a relic of a time most wished to forget. He flipped the file open. Every page reeked of classified ink and buried stories. Then he stopped on one name, underlined in red. Asterisk, roar. Allen retired. Asterisk. The room shifted slightly, like the air had lost its balance. Some of the younger officers exchanged glances, unfamiliar with the name, but the older ones they stiffened. They knew it. They remembered the legends that training manuals never mentioned. Kerrigan's voice was controlled, but the edge beneath it was unmistakable. A system breach occurred during Fleet Drill 9. Someone triggered an access code buried under the old combat network, a code that was never meant to exist again. He pressed a button. The holographic display blinked to life, an encryption tag spinning slowly in the air, pulsing with a faint red light. Across the bottom, a designation appeared in stark letters. Asterisk, asterisk, Hammer 6, asterisk, asterisk. The room fell still. The hum of the air vents became deafening. Kerrigan's jaw tightened. "I want a trace on this signal," he ordered. "Every source, every relay, every server. Find out who pulled this ghost out of my system." An aide at the far end hesitated, his face pale. He swallowed once, then spoke quietly. "Sir, that call sign Hammer 6, that was his." Kerrigan's head lifted. The silence stretched thin. He didn't need to ask who times his times meant. He remembered the man, the mission, the chaos in the desert that had nearly buried both of them alive. Alan Rohr, the field engineer who refused to abandon a burning vehicle, who turned broken machines into shields, and who had disobeyed direct orders to bring men home when Kerrigan had already written them off. The Admiral closed the folder slowly, his gloved hand pausing on the faded name like a touch that burned. "Then get me the man himself," he said. No hesitation, no explanation, just command. Outside, the morning mist had begun to lift. Beyond the hangars, in the forgotten corners of the base where engines coughed and tools clanged, a figure wiped grease from his hands with a stained rag. His hair was grayer now, his limp more pronounced, but his movements carried the same deliberate precision of a man who once spoke the language of machines. Alan Rohr adjusted his faded jacket and looked up as if something unseen had passed through the air, a sound, a memory, a pulse. He couldn't name it yet, but he felt it in his bones. The past had stirred. Somewhere, deep inside the Navy's digital veins, an old heartbeat had returned to life. And whether he wanted it or not, it was calling his name again. The SUV rolled to a stop on the cracked asphalt near the far end of the base, where rusted hangars leaned like old soldiers waiting for a war that would never come. The engine idled for a moment, its low hum blending with the distant cry of gulls and the rhythmic clang of steel from the shipyard beyond. When the back door opened, a single boot touched the ground, slow, deliberate, steady, despite the limp that followed. Alan Rohr emerged like a memory the world had tried to forget. His uniform wasn't regulation anymore, a faded field jacket with grease stains on the cuffs, an old patch barely hanging by its threads. But the way he stood, The way he looked at the horizon as if measuring the distance to something unseen, carried the weight of someone who had long ago earned the right to stand however he pleased. The young officers at the checkpoint straightened when they saw him, but couldn't hide their curiosity. One of them whispered, "That's him? That's Hammer 6?" The other shook his head. "Can't be. He looks like my grandfather." Yet neither could stop watching him as he passed, his cane tapping against the concrete in a slow, even rhythm that sounded less like weakness and more like a metronome keeping time with memory. When Roar reached the administrative wing, the air felt different, colder, cleaner, sharp, with the scent of disinfectant and command. A junior officer escorted him through the halls without a word. Every step echoed. Every passing glance carried judgment or awe. The old veteran said nothing. He had long since learned that silence had its own authority. Inside the conference room, Admiral Kerrigan waited. The same steel posture, the same measured calm, but his eyes gave him away. They flicked up from the dossier on the table and landed on Roar with something between respect and regret. For a heartbeat, neither man spoke. Years of unspoken history hung in the sterile air between them. "You took your time," Kerrigan said finally. His voice was firm, but it carried an edge softened by something close to guilt. Roar shrugged slightly. "Took me a minute to remember I still had clearance." Kerrigan allowed himself a faint smirk. "You still think this is a social call?" "Nothing social ever starts with your name on a file," Roar replied, lowering himself slowly into the chair opposite. His hands, scarred and steady, folded on the table. "So go ahead, Admiral. Tell me why the past decided to wake up." Kerrigan tapped the folder. "A breach in the fleet's simulation core. Someone used an authorization code that hasn't existed for 15 years. Hammer 6. The name hung in the air like the ringing of a bell. Roar didn't flinch. He only breathed once, deep and controlled. The Admiral studied him, waiting for a reaction, a denial, anything. But Roar just looked back with that same unbreakable calm. "Say it," Kerrigan pressed, leaning forward. "For the record." Roar's voice came low, gravel in tone but strong enough to fill the room. "Hammer 6. It wasn't shouted, but it carried power, the kind of sound that pulled ghosts from walls. The aides standing near the door shifted uneasily. Even the Admiral's composure cracked for a fraction of a second. That call sign had been spoken only in legend, whispered among cadets who thought it was myth. It belonged to a man who'd done the impossible, resurrected dead engines under fire, dragged men from burning wreckage, and turned defeat into salvation. Kerrigan leaned back slowly. His fingers drummed once against the file before stilling. "You know what that means, don't you?" Roar nodded, his eyes distant, reflecting the flicker of the overhead light. "Means something old just started breathing again, and whatever it is, it's not done with us yet." The Admiral's jaw tightened. "This isn't about nostalgia, Roar. This is about security. About control." "Control," Roar echoed softly, standing with effort. "You can't control what you don't understand, Admiral. And you never understood what Hammer 6 really was." Kerrigan's chazes sharpened. "Enlighten me." Roar met his eyes, calm and unflinching. It wasn't a code, it was a promise. For a long, heavy moment, the two men just stood there, one bound by rank, the other by memory. Outside, the sea wind rattled the window panes, carrying the faint echo of machinery from the docks. Something deep within the base hummed to life, an old frequency, faint but real. Kerrigan noticed it, the brief flicker of power in the wall monitors. Roar turned toward the sound. "You feel that?" he murmured. Something buried woke up. And as the Admiral followed his gaze to the flickering lights, he realized it wasn't just a metaphor. Whatever Hammer 6 had been, it was awake again, and the man who once carried that name was the only one who truly knew what it meant. The night hung heavy over the bay, thick with fog that curled like smoke around the skeletons of forgotten ships. The moon broke through in slivers, casting silver light across the rows of mothballed destroyers lined along the pier, silent, colossal, and obsolete. But one of them, Asterisk, the valiant Asterisk, seemed to breathe differently tonight. Its massive gray hull caught the light as if something beneath its steel skin stirred after too long a sleep. Alan Rohr stood before it, his figure outlined by the dim floodlights that hummed against the mist. His coat flapped in the cold wind coming off the sea, his cane planted firm against the concrete. He stared up at the towering vessel like a man visiting an old friend's grave, except this friend wasn't entirely dead. The hull was scarred, pitted with rust, but still proud, still waiting. He reached out, placing a weathered hand on the cold metal. Beneath the corrosion and dust, he could feel a faint vibration, not mechanical yet, more like memory. "Still here, huh?" he murmured. His palm lingered. Still listening. Behind him, Private Lewis adjusted the flashlight nervously, the beam dancing across the faded white letters on the side. Asterisk, asterisk, USS Valiant. Asterisk, asterisk. "Sir," he whispered, "this ship's been offline for almost 2 decades. No power, no crew. Why would they bring you here?" Rohr didn't answer. He was already moving, limping up the ramp that led into the yawning dark of the ship's interior. The door groaned open, as if reluctant to break the silence, and the smell hit him: oil, rust, and old ghosts. He didn't need a briefing. He knew why he was here. The signal that triggered Hammer 6 hadn't come from outside the network. It came from something buried inside it, something times alive, asterisk. When they reached the control deck, Lewis hesitated. "Sir, there's no power." Rohr flipped a manual switch on a side panel. The lights stuttered, flickered, then blinked weakly to life. Consoles glowed a dull amber. Screens once thought dead came alive in a quiet chorus of static and hum. The Valiant was waking up. Rohr exhaled through his nose, steady, like a man who'd expected it all along. "See that, kid? She remembers me." As they stepped toward the main control station, a sharp pulse of light flashed across the monitors. Lines of code scrolled faster than the eye could follow. Then it appeared a command string, glowing red against the black screen. Asterisk, asterisk, Hammer 6 authorization verified. Asterisk, asterisk. Lewis froze. "That's... I know what it is." Rohr's voice cut in quietly, firm. He leaned over the console, his reflection wavering in the glass. "Someone's playing with old ghosts, and they just used my name to do it." The ship's intercom crackled, empty, like a throat clearing. Static whispered through the deck, low and pulsing. The radar screen lit up, showing a pattern Rohr hadn't seen in years: encrypted waves transmitting from deep within the Navy's retired AI systems. He ran a finger across the screen, tracing the coordinates. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. "They're not just copying the protocol, they're using the Time's original core asterisk. I helped build this system." Lewis frowned. "So what do we do? Pull the plug?" Rohr gave a slow, weary smile. "You don't shoot ghosts, son." He crouched, opening a maintenance panel and reaching for a toolkit that hadn't seen daylight in years. "You outthink them." As he worked, the hum of the ship deepened, rising in pitch, the sound of long dormant circuits finding breath again. The lights flickered as Rohr's hands moved with uncanny precision, reconnecting cables, bypassing safeties, feeling his way through memory and metal alike. Lewis watched in silence. The old man's concentration was absolute, his eyes scanning every gauge, his fingers twisting every bolt with the certainty of a surgeon stitching history back together. "You're fighting it," Lewis whispered, "but it's not even alive." Rohr didn't look up. Everything built to protect learns how to fight back eventually. Even machines. Minutes stretched into hours. The wind howled against the hull. Outside, the waves slammed against the pier in rhythm with the faint heartbeat of the ship. Then a sound. Low, resonant. The engine room deep below rumbled once, like an exhale after a long sleep. Lewis took a step back. "Sir, what's happening?" She's remembering, Roar said softly. He tapped the terminal one last time. And whoever woke her up is about to find out she still answers to Hammer 6. The ship's lights stabilized, burning brighter now, steady as dawn. Roar straightened slowly, pain flickering through his knees, but pride hardening in his stance. Somewhere, beyond the bay, encrypted transmissions began bouncing across military channels, untraceable but alive, carrying one name that the system had never forgotten. Hammer 6, asterisk. And in the silent glow of the control deck, the old destroyer seemed to hum back not as a machine, but as a memory reborn. The control tower was chaos. Red lights pulsed across the glass walls. Sirens shrieked through every corridor, and voices collided in frantic shouts that made the air itself tremble. The ocean outside was black and wild, waves thrashing against the pier as if echoing the storm inside. Dozens of officers crowded around the central console, their faces lit by the feverish glow of failing monitors. Lines of corrupted code cascaded down the screens, and through the noise, one phrase repeated like a drumbeat hammer, 6 asterisk. Signal breach confirmed, a technician yelled, his voice cutting through the noise. It's piggybacking through the decommissioned fleet network. Sir, it's trying to access live missile command. Admiral Kerrigan burst through the door like a thunderclap, his coat snapping behind him. Who authorized this connection? He barked. No one answered. The silence that followed said everything it hadn't been authorized by anyone. It was already inside. Kerrigan's eyes darted to the primary console. Shut it down, he ordered. Now. Sir, the firewall's rejecting our commands, another voice replied, panic rising. It's rewriting itself faster than we can counter. We've lost override access. And then, above the noise, a steadier sound entered the room, the slow, uneven rhythm of footsteps. Roar stepped inside, leaning on his cane, his face pale from exhaustion, but his eyes sharp with focus. He'd come straight from Time's the Valiant Asterisk, summoned by instinct more than order. What the hell are you doing here? Kerrigan snapped. Roar didn't answer. He crossed the floor without a word, pushing past stunned officers until he reached the nearest terminal. His hands trembled slightly as he set his cane aside and began typing, the clack of the keys almost rhythmic against the chaos. Sir, we're locked out, the chief technician cried. Nothing's responding. Roar didn't look up. Not me, he muttered. His voice was steady, a quiet defiance that carried across the room. It still remembers who I am. Kerrigan froze, watching the old man work. The code on the screen shifted, fighting him, flickering between command lines and encrypted barriers that twisted like living things. But Roar's fingers moved with a familiarity born of history. Every keystroke was a memory, every line of code a heartbeat from a younger version of himself who'd once built this monster and buried it deep. Sweat beaded on his temple. His breath grew shallow. The room's lights dimmed and flared as the system fought him. Then suddenly the screens went dark. For a moment, the entire control tower held its breath. No alarms, no lights, just silence, heavy and absolute. Then, one by one, the monitors came back online. The rogue signal was gone. Missile control restored. Threat neutralized. Someone exhaled audibly. A murmur rippled through the room. Kerrigan stood motionless, his hand still hovering over the console as if afraid to believe it. Roar leaned back slowly, reclaiming his cane. His hands were shaking harder now, but his expression remained calm, almost detached. Kerrigan stepped forward, his voice lower now, stripped of command. Why? He asked quietly. Why do you still answer that call sign, old man? After everything it's cost you. Roar looked up at him, the faintest trace of a smile ghosting across his face. His eyes, pale but burning with quiet conviction, met the Admiral's. Because there's still someone out there, he said softly, who believes it means hope. Kerrigan said nothing. The words landed heavier than any order he'd ever given. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he raised his hand in a salute. It wasn't protocol, it was penance. Respect. Roar nodded once, a gesture of understanding rather than acceptance. He turned toward the wide glass window overlooking the bay. Outside, the first rays of dawn broke through the thinning fog. The light touched Times, the Valiant's Times hull, turning the old steel gold for the briefest moment. The storm had passed. The base was quiet again, save for the low hum of machines returning to order. Kerrigan stood beside Roar, both men watching the horizon in silence. The war was long over, yet the ghosts had never really left. Roar tightened his grip on his cane, eyes never leaving the sea. "You can retire a man," he murmured, "but you can't retire what he stands for." Kerrigan's voice was barely a whisper. And what did Hammer 6 stand for? Roar's answer came like the tide, calm and inevitable. For the ones who didn't make it home. The two men stood there as the sun rose higher, light spilling across the deck and into the control room. No more alarms, no more ghosts. Just the sea, the dawn, and two soldiers, bound by a past that refused to fade. Some titles vanish with time. Some stories sink beneath the waves. But some call signs, some names carry their own kind of immortality. Asterisk, Hammer. 6 times wasn't just a code. It was a heartbeat that refused to stop.